When it comes to the 15-inch MacBook Air, like a lot of people, I've been peddling the whole, it is just a bigger version of the 13-inch MacBook Air. However, I've been using mine for a few weeks now, and it really isn't. Welcome back to the channel, guys. As you've noticed, I'm not in the studio. I'm actually, well, it's obvious I'm in a car, but anyway, I'm traveling somewhere else, but that's not what this video is about. I needed to make it because there are 5 things I need to tell you about the 15-inch MacBook Air. And the reason I want to tell you about them is because the Apple MacBook lineup is expanding to a point where it's getting really confusing about which one to buy. Do you go for the MacBook Air? Do you go for the MacBook Pro? And if you go for either of those, do you go for the 13-inch, the 15-inch, the 14-inch? It goes on and on. So if you've reached the point of your MacBook buying journey where you're thinking, maybe it's the 15-inch MacBook Air that I need, this is the video to watch, because like I say, I've got 5 things that I've learned over the last few weeks of using that laptop that you really need to know. This video is sponsored by tomtoc, and for good reason, because while I was in New York City last month, I discovered the best backpack for the 15-inch MacBook Air. This is their Urban Vintage Flip laptop backpack, and it features a military-style outlook, which is made for pretty much anything. So whether you're going for a big adventure in the wild, or a trip around the city, or just your day-to-day commute, it is perfect. And it features a massive 20-litre capacity. There's a dual-layer device compartment, which is super soft inside. I never worried about putting the 15-inch MacBook Air inside there. There's also a quick access top pocket, 2 side pockets, a zipped privacy pocket, and a magnetic front pocket. There's just loads of pockets. There is so much room inside this thing. There's even a side entrance for quick access to things like your camera or your headphones. Oh, and I can't forget the luggage strap, which was absolutely invaluable while flying. And on that note, it was so convenient around New York City, super comfortable. I barely knew it was there, and because of that, this is now my daily backpack. So a big thanks again to tomtoc for sponsoring this video, and to find out more about the Urban Vintage backpack, just click that link in the description. So number 1 on my list is that I probably should have bought the higher spec version. And if you know me, you know I've got this thing about buying the base spec of any Mac, mostly, apart from the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which is my production machine. Any other Mac I buy, I go for the cheapest one available. And that's because I want to show you guys what it's like to spend the least amount of money possible on a Mac. And that has proved very interesting in this era of Apple Silicon. And that's because the biggest thing it's proved is that you no longer have to spend a fortune to get really good performance out of your Mac. The challenge with the 15-inch MacBook Air is that it feels like you want to do more with it. So that big screen that you get, which I'll come on to, is a real productivity monster, but also it reminds me a lot of the 16-inch MacBook Pro. And like I say, that laptop is my main production machine. However, when I'm using this 15-inch MacBook Air, I'm always thinking maybe I should have bought more or put more into it so that I could do more with it. And interestingly, a lot of people are asking whether or not to buy the 15-inch MacBook Air over the 14-inch or 16-inch MacBook Pro, which suggests to me that it's really catching the eye of people who want to put this thing to serious use. So my advice straight away is to spend as much money as you can on this laptop, because trust me, when it arrives, you'll want to do a lot with it. And yes, it does have that NAND chip issue, which you do need to be aware of. Basically, you need to get at least 512 gig of storage to avoid any slowness with that base spec model. There's a long story behind it, which I won't bore you with now. Trust me, guys, spend as much as you can on this laptop. Number 2 on my list is that you get used to that 15-inch display, or at least I did, very, very quickly. And that is really surprising because it is quite a big step up from the 13-inch MacBook Air, bigger than you think. If you put them side by side, that roughly 2-inch difference makes a big difference. And if you do any research into the most popular size laptop, you'll end up at the 15-inch. And I can now see why. I've been using a 13-inch MacBook Air as my kind of main daily driver, do-it-all machine for a long time, and I was worried that the jump up to 15 inches might be a bit too much. but it isn't. It never feels too big, it never feels too cumbersome, and I use it in all the same places that I've used my 13-inch MacBook Air. So on the same train trays, in planes, you know, on my lap at home, on the same coffee shop tables, and weirdly, it doesn't feel that much bigger, even though the additional screen estate is so useful. My third learning about the 15-inch MacBook Air is that the notch still doesn't matter. Now, I've talked about this briefly on my 13-inch MacBook Air review and the review I've done of the 16-inch MacBook Pro and the review I've done of the 14-inch MacBook Pro, because they all have notches, which, if you're not aware, is this cutout at the top of the screen, a little bit like an iPhone, which houses the selfie camera or the FaceTime camera, whatever it is. Basically, Apple has decided to move that cutout thing that they've done with the iPhone over to the MacBook, and that's how it is, guys. It's not going to change for a long time. The great thing is that if you actually work on your laptop and do stuff with it, that notch disappears. The only time you notice the notch is if you keep staring at it. Okay, number 4 on my list is the fact that the 15-inch MacBook Air is unbelievably light. It's very hard to get this across, obviously, on a video like this, which is why it makes sense to go to an Apple store and actually pick one of these things up. But trust me, when you do, you will be bowled over. I think Apple calls it impossibly thin or something on their website, and it's not impossibly thin, obviously, but it is ridiculously thin, which means it's also incredibly light. And I'm not joking, I cannot feel this thing in my backpack at all. If you know me, you'll know that I'm fed up with the 16-inch MacBook Pro being this lead weight in my backpack. You just don't get that with a 15-inch MacBook Air, which again takes me back to that first point, that if you want to use this as a really important main production machine to do lots of creative, clever stuff with, spec it up as much as you can, and even though you'll be spending a fair bit of money on a laptop, you'll be getting back ultra convenience and ultra portability. And if you've been following my other videos about the 15-inch MacBook Air, you'll be glad to know that I've got past the point now of worrying about bending it. I don't think there's been any stories on the internet about this. I don't think there's been a bend gate or anything like that. These are very robust machines. That is what you get from Apple. My 5th and final learning about the 15-inch MacBook Air is that it isn't Apple's best laptop ever. That award goes to the 13-inch MacBook Air, and I'm not going to pick the M1 or the M2 out of that laptop because it's just that platform is so perfect. The size is fantastic, the weight is even less, obviously, than the 15-inch MacBook Air, and it is just a wonderful device for most people, really. But as I mentioned earlier, we know that 15-inch laptops are incredibly popular, which means that the fact Apple now has an affordable, and it really is, as far as a Mac is concerned, an affordable option at that size is a huge deal. However, because it's not for everyone, I absolutely very highly recommend that you go and check one out in an Apple store, like I mentioned earlier. Go and look at it, put it side by side with the 13-inch version, and try and work out which one would be more convenient for you day to day. This is such an important point because it's a new laptop from Apple, a completely new category, a brand new size for the MacBook Air. It's very easy to get overexcited about it, order it, and then realize it's actually too big. I'm absolutely fascinated by the 15-inch MacBook Air to the point where I want to know more and more about your take on it. So if you've decided to go for it, let me know why. And equally, if you think it's not quite right for you, again, let me know why in the comments. I'd love to gather a bit more audience reaction to this laptop. And if you want to see my expanded thoughts on the 15-inch MacBook Air, keep watching for a link to my original review, which I undertook in New York City.